How much of our lives do we spend stressed out over stuff that, in the end, just doesn't matter? Think about it. How many of those sleepless nights, those anxieties, those tears are wrapped up in things that don't have any weight in eternity? We let the little stuff steal our big purpose. And I know some of you might be thinking, but I'll worry about eternity tomorrow. These things are taking my peace today, right now. Believe me, I get it. I know what it's like to feel completely consumed by something out of your control, to feel like that issue is bigger than you are. I'm not saying these things are easy to shake off, but let me tell you, there's a question that cuts right through all that noise. What really matters? Today, I'll tell you about a man in the Bible who thought he had it all figured out. A man who had every reason to believe he knew what mattered, but was surprised by God. His name was Saul. Saul was a man who dedicated every ounce of himself to what he believed was right. He grew up studying the scriptures and believed with all his heart that his mission was to protect the laws and traditions of his ancestors. Saul thought that's what God wanted him to do, and he was good at it. The religious elite looked up to him as the defender of the faith. But Saul was so consumed by his mission to protect the traditions that he saw Jesus and his followers as a threat. To Saul, Jesus was an impostor, a man who claimed to be the Messiah, but was, in Saul's eyes, leading people away from the right path. And when Jesus' followers began spreading his message, Saul felt he had to do something. He was determined to shut down the message of Jesus before it could spread any further. So Saul became a persecutor of Christians who were trying to spread the message of Jesus. He went from town to town, hunting them down and throwing them into prison. Some even lost their lives because of him. In Saul's mind, he was on a righteous mission. He was fighting for God, or so he thought. How many times do we convince ourselves we're on the right path, only to realize we're actually standing in the way of God's plans? Maybe you felt so sure before, so certain that this was your purpose, this was the life you were meant to live, like every step you were taking was leading you exactly where you needed to go. But sometimes, God has to break our plans to show us His purpose. So there Saul was, full of confidence, on his way to a city called Damascus, with one goal in mind: find more Christians, shut them down, and keep the faith pure. But he was about to receive an unexpected visit. Suddenly, Jesus appeared in a flash of light that stopped Saul in his tracks. I like to imagine Jesus looking at Saul, knowing that if he didn't step in, Saul would spend his entire life chasing a purpose that would never fulfill him. Maybe Jesus thought, if I let Saul keep going, he'll waste his passion on something I never called him to do. He'll put all his confidence in his own strength, and he'll miss what I created him for. Have you ever thought about that? That maybe God allowed some of your plans to fall apart because, if He didn't intervene, you'd spend years pursuing something that would never satisfy your soul. If I don't step in here, they'll keep holding on to that abusive relationship. If I let them keep going, they'll pour all their energy into proving themselves to people who were never meant to define their worth. God didn't cancel your path. He just recalculated your route. So Saul was blinded literally by the intensity of Jesus' light. And Jesus asked Saul one question that turned his entire world upside down. "Saul, why do you persecute me?" In that moment, everything Saul thought he knew, everything he had built his life on, began to crumble. He was now face to face with the reality that he was fighting against the very God he claimed to serve. The man who once held all the answers was suddenly left with nothing but questions. And right there, in that place of total surrender, Saul did the only thing he could do. He looked up and asked, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" Think about it. Jesus had to appear right in front of him, and Saul had to be blinded just to understand that his purpose wasn't what he thought it was. Only then, stripped of all his certainty, did he finally surrender. So let me ask you, what's it going to take for you to surrender? Maybe you're at a crossroads with your family, your career, or your health. Maybe you've been doing everything in your power to make things work, but nothing is falling into place. How long are you going to keep trying before you finally look up and say, "Lord, what do you want me to do? What really matters to you, Lord?" Because the truth is, in the moments when we have no way out, no options, no answers, and no strength, that's where God does his best work. His purpose for you is bigger than any plan you could ever make for yourself. From that moment, Saul was no longer the man he used to be. Jesus gave him a new name, Paul, and with that new name came a new mission. Everything in his life shifted. The priorities he once held so tightly started to fade into the background as he began to focus on one thing alone: God's call to spread the gospel. Now, as Paul, he wasn't living for status, power, or applause. He didn't need anyone's approval but God's. His mission was to spread the truth about Jesus, to share the good news of grace, no matter the cost. And that decision, that change in focus, altered everything about his life. Paul faced hardships that most of us can't even imagine: imprisonment, beatings, rejection at every turn. But he didn't waver, because he knew what truly mattered. His life was no longer built on temporary things that could be shaken or taken away. His foundation was in Christ, in a purpose that went beyond his own comfort, his own plans. This is what happens when we redefine our priorities, when we let go of the things we once thought were essential and instead focus on what's eternal. We find a strength we never knew we had. Paul understood that when you focus on what truly matters, you're building something that lasts far beyond your time on this earth. So today, I want to leave you with this question: what really matters? Are you willing to let go of the things that pull you away from God's purpose? Are you ready to stop chasing what is temporary and instead fix your eyes on what is eternal? Because here's the truth: when you surrender, when you finally let go and ask God to guide you, He will take you places you never thought you'd go. And when you're walking in that purpose, when you're living for what really matters, no trial, no obstacle, no storm can shake you. God's calling for you is bigger than anything you could build on your own. So, what's it going to be? Will you keep holding on to what doesn't matter, or will you trust Him to lead you to what does?